at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and the director of the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center, which is one of the co-sponsors of this breakfast, along with the Association for Conflict Resolution of Greater New York. Today is our 246th breakfast. Since 9/11, we met in person at John Jay, and it would have been great to see everyone in person this morning. But since April 2020, we've been meeting virtually. These breakfasts are recorded and they are posted on the ACR-GNY website at www.acr-gny.org. And in the future will also be posted on the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center's website. These breakfasts are made possible every month by a wonderful team that I work with, including Julie Denny, Chuck Newman, Matthew Latimer, and Nikki Borofsky. For the foreseeable future, we will be continuing these breakfasts virtually. I know many of you ask us each month whether we will be going back in person. We're still not permitted to have large gatherings on campus, so look forward to seeing you each month here for the foreseeable future online. We are really delighted this morning to have with us Dan Shapiro, and Julie will introduce him formally in a minute, but I was looking at my old emails last night and see that Dan and I came together in 2005 when I arranged for him to be part of a training program that we were doing at John Jay College for the hostage negotiators. And that email I was telling Dan just a short while ago was a very long email recounting the history of the NYPD hostage team. So it's great to have Dan with us this morning and to reconnect. This is a very sad week for us here in New York. We lost 2 officers. There have to be better ways to deal with differences, conflicts, misunderstandings that people have. We have an incredible agenda ahead of us as conflict resolvers to be able to spread the kind of information and work that we do with the general public. Being relevant is probably the message. How can we be more relevant in general? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julie.
Wait, before we do, if I could interrupt, I'm sorry to take time away from Dan, but since you're mentioning the police and the hostage negotiators, do you want to pitch your February 17th program at New York Law School?
Oh, sure. New York Law School is holding an event on the 17th. That's the right date, right?
I think
don't
that's
have
the
it
date,
memorized. Yeah, I have so many events coming up. And we will be talking about conflict management and policing. I'll be moderating. Susan Herman, who was a former Deputy Commissioner of Policing Strategy, Collaborative Policing. Jeff Thompson, who's a current detective with NYPD, and Kirk, I'm always forgetting, I'm just meeting Kirk, I forget his last name, starts with a B, who's a law professor and former police officer at New York Law School, will be the panelist. So thank you, Chuck, for circling to an upcoming event. And just so all of you know, next month's speaker will be Batabile Mtambeni, who will be talking about ombuds work. And with that, back to Julie.
We are very blessed to have Dan Shapiro with us today. Dr. Daniel Shapiro is the founder and director of the Harvard International Negotiation Program, something all of you may have heard of. He's author of Negotiating the Non-Negotiable, and Matthew Bishop of the Economist Group called it quite simply the best book I have ever read on negotiating in situations of extreme conflict. He's co-author with Roger Fisher of Beyond Reason, Using Emotions as You Negotiate. He teaches negotiation at Harvard College. He instructs psychology interns at Harvard Medical School, McLean Hospital, and leads executive education sessions at the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School, Harvard Kennedy School, and Harvard Medical School. He served on the faculty at Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University and at the Sloan School of Management at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's launched successful conflict resolution initiatives in the Middle East, Europe, and East Asia. And for 3 years, he chaired the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Conflict Resolution. He developed a conflict management curriculum that has reached more than 1 million youth across more than 20 countries. And he's recipient of numerous awards, including the American Psychological Association's Early Career Award. Dan, you're past the early career stage. And the Cloak Millen Peacemaker of the Year Award. We are so glad you're here. Please take it away, Dan.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. Thank you, Maria. Thank you to all of you. This is an incredible, incredible honor to be with you. And as much as I see you on my screen, I am envisioning all of us together in some room having this conversation in some sort of intimate way. So thank you all. I am truly humbled. I recognize the amount of experience and expertise in the field of dispute resolution that is in our Zoom room. So let me start by saying that I think I'm a little fuzzy on my screen. Well, I'll try and figure that out over time. It might just be that I'm not a morning person and it's morning and my persona is such. Let me get my slides up for starters and work from there. But while I do, whoops, you all disappeared. And there, you're back. Let me say, I do so vividly remember Maria, the two of us meeting for the first time there in New York City, and that week of training with the hostage negotiators, with yourself and others, honestly, it was one of the most meaningful weeks of my life in terms of my own understanding of conflict resolution and the power of the concepts that all of us in this room use every day in some of the most difficult kinds of situations there are, hostage situations. So I also, before we formally begin, actually, can you see my slides? If so, just a thumbs up. Okay, great. And I love seeing so many of your faces. Thank you for braving, the showing of your face on Zoom. Let me see if my slides now work. There we go. First of all, a huge thank you to all of you in the organizing committee for today, Maria, Julie, Chuck, Matthew, Nikki, and to all of you for joining. We have some issues in our world right now. There's some very serious issues. For those of you who were able to join from 8 until 8:30, you heard some of those issues being raised. How do we deal with conflict in the public sector? How do we deal with the challenges of democracy and potential destabilization of some of the foundations of democracy? How do we deal with race relations? How do we deal with everyday life living in a pandemic, and on and on? Emotionally charged conflicts feel like they are everywhere now. And for those of you still working in your homes, which is probably many of you, those emotionally charged conflicts now have entered the home perhaps in ways that they haven't before. My own work has been in the field of conflict resolution for about 30 years now. I started quite young, and it was initially right at the turn of communism in Eastern and Central Europe. Longer story why I was interested there, but I developed a curriculum on conflict management for youth with the notion, as there was all of this political transition in Eastern and Central Europe, how do you deal with conflict within an emergent open society? And my question was, how can we help to train youth in new ways of dealing with conflict as the politics and the political sphere changes over time? And I've continued to work in the field in many different locations. A lot of my work is in the Middle East. A lot of that work is around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I am also struggling, as many of you are, to try and figure out how do we also deal with polarization in the United States and many other countries as well. But let me take you right now for a moment, first to the purpose, and then to a whole nother country. First, the purpose of today is twofold. It is to help you become more aware of 5 things I call lures. These things that tend to exacerbate conflict and make things really emotionally charged, even when we may not want them to be so very charged. And 2, we're going to some small degree, examine some ways to try to counteract these 5 lures, these 5 things. Well, let me start by taking you to the mountains of Switzerland right now. How many of you have ever been to Switzerland? If you could raise your hands. And how many of you have ever been to Davos, Switzerland? Okay, a number of you. A number of years back, way back in 2006, I think it was, I was invited to the World Economic Forum's annual summit there in those beautiful snow-capped mountains of Switzerland. And while I was there, I did a little exercise that I'd like to share with you right now, because to me, it was a very striking exercise that tells us a lot, or at least raises a lot of questions about what we are struggling with in today's world. The exercise was in a big space, big building, but in a small room. Into this room streamed out 45 global leaders. So we had a deputy head of state in my little session. We had leading academics. We had peace and security experts, CEOs of Fortune 50 companies, and on, people who had a lot of experience in conflict resolution and negotiation. And they stream into this room. And as they walk in the room, I randomly divide them into 6 different groups. So they're sitting now at 6 different tables. And I tell the group my belief, which might sound quite evident these days, but wasn't so way back then. I said, our world seems like it's becoming more and more of a tribalized world, in the sense of being a divided world. And as much as we are more and more interconnected economically and politically and so on, I said, I fear that divisions are going to become more and more. And the group's listening and they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. And I say, you have this wonderful opportunity today to create your own tribe, to create your own group that you all at your table feel you have some real ownership over. And they said, fine. I gave them a set of questions that they needed to answer over the course of about 60 minutes. And I gave them even little things that they could dress up in their, in their outfits, so that they could build some sort of national uniform of some kind. And they go off and they answer these questions. They create their own identity at their tables. 60 minutes later, we all come back as a big group. So now imagine all of us in a small room, 6 tables still, people dressed up in different sorts of ways. And I start to debrief this exercise. And as I'm about a minute into debriefing this exercise, the lights go black. And into the room bursts this intergalactic alien. So a person dressed up as an alien who says, I am an intergalactic alien. I have come to destroy the Earth. I will give you one opportunity to save this world from complete destruction. You must choose one of these 6 tribes here in this room as the tribe of everybody. You will have 3 rounds of negotiation, and if you cannot come to agreement by the end of those 3 rounds of negotiation, the world will be destroyed. And as ridiculous as this all sounds, you could feel a shift in energy in that room there at Davos. These 6 tables with these groups of leaders, they said, we are going to save the world. 6 chairs in the middle of the room. A leader from each tribe comes to the middle of the room to start negotiating which tribe will be the tribe that everybody joins to save the world. And almost immediately, someone says, actually, round 1, there was a media mogul from Dubai, wonderfully brilliant person. He says, look, we must start by talking about process. How are we going to come to a decision? And of course, for all of you teaching negotiation, you're like, yeah, that is the right question to ask. Start by talking about process. And that worked for about a minute, until this other mogul from UK, his arms were crossed and he says, hey, why is nobody listening to me? Why is nobody listening to my tribe? Round 1 ends fairly friendly, but no agreement. Round 2, These leaders come back to try to negotiate which tribe will be the tribe of everybody. And one gentleman starts with the most persuasive rhetoric I've heard. He says, look, we are the rainbow tribe. We believe in all colors, all sizes, all shapes, all ethnicities. Come to our tribe. We will accept you all. Almost immediately, one tribe says, we'll join your tribe. There's a venture capitalist representing another tribe, sitting across from the rainbow tribe's leader. His arms are crossed, and he says, well, if we're all equal, why don't you come and join our tribe? It's a basic human rights argument in a way. If we're all equal, why should I come to your tribe, you not come to mine? And round 2, and still no agreement. Round 3. Final round before this world would otherwise explode. Davos, back to the middle of the room to negotiate. Come 6 leaders. By chance this time, you have 5 men and 1 woman. The moment they get back to the middle of the room, these men start yelling and screaming at one another, yelling at, as well at this woman. She gets so rightly enraged, she literally stands on her stool and she yells, this is just another example of male competitive behavior. You all come to my tribe. One joins hers, the others refuse, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom. The world explodes in Davos with global leaders. I've run this exercise dozens and dozens and dozens of times around the world. And with the most modest of exception, the world explodes again and again. Over the course of 50 or 60 minutes, people can so identify with a new group identity that they would rather, cling onto that identity than save the world. The first time I developed and did this exercise, it was in what was then called Macedonia, and there was rising tension between ethnic Albanians and Macedonians, and the world exploded viciously there. The question started to emerge in my head, what the hell is going on? Rationally, we want to save this world, but there is something very deep in our psyche that's causing us a lot of problems. And for those of you, again, who are here from 8 till 8:30 in our conversation today, you heard many of those problems bubbling up. Rationality is important, but it certainly does not seem like enough to deal with conflict and problems in our current era. And Shakira, you put it right in, you hit the nail on the head. Identity is at the core. Let me share with you in simple form how I see the problem that we are facing. We're on this little ship right here, and we want to get to that nice little island of success where we have a cooperative mindset. We and others are working side by side together on our shared differences. And the best way to get from that place we are at right now to that island is with a straight line. Rationality, logic. And I look at the phenomenal books in the field of negotiation, conflict resolution, the Bible of our field, getting to yes. In essence, it's a very rational approach to negotiation. Not that it's wrong. I think it is essential for conflict resolution, but is it enough? And so over the years, new books, new ideas, new articles that many of you have produced have been brought into the field of negotiation as well, saying, you know what, rationality is not enough, because that sea there, that blue sea that you see on the screen, it actually has some waves and there's some storms. That's emotion. And so, for example, a number of years back, Roger Fisher and I wrote a book called Beyond Reason, asking the question, as people negotiate, how do you deal with the emotional dimension? And we offered a framework in that book. But that too doesn't seem like enough. And in a way, because there's this other thing that's out there, and this is my poor drawing here, but that thing to the left is a waterfall. And as much as we know we should be moving right toward that island, we got to work rationally. Why aren't you rational? We got to deal with we have to deal with the emotions. As much as we know we should be moving toward that island, boy, there are a lot of undercurrents, and they're pulling us in the wrong direction. They're pulling us toward a divisive mindset. And as you can see there, I suggest that a divisive mindset is a thing, that it's a real orientation that we take on with three basic characteristics. One, it's adversarial. I love my wife, I love my kids, but when we get into an argument, all of a sudden it's me versus you, adversarial. The second characteristic is that it is self-righteous. So you and I talk politics. We heard this earlier today to some degree. You and I talk politics. I know I am right. My perspective is legitimate. And you, my dear friend, are wrong and crazy. It's a moral judgment, contempt. And third, the third characteristic of this divisive mindset is that it is insular, closed. I will argue and defend my perspective to no ends, but I'm going to close my ears to you. I don't like your political kind. And in fact, I'm not going to learn more about your kind because I already know about you. I've read about you in the papers. I know you. Insular, self-righteous, and adversarial. And once we go there, and once multiple sides go there, we're falling down that waterfall together. As I was watching that tribes exercise and the world explode time after time, I really did approach it like a microcosm or a metaphor of the reality we face. And I started asking as a psychologist, what's bringing us toward that waterfall? Why are we going precisely in the direction that we do not want to go? And a partial answer from my perspective is that there are these forces, these emotional forces that lure us in that direction when our identity feels threatened. So we're moving beyond rationality. We're moving beyond emotion to the realm of identity. And when our identity feels threatened, I suggest that there are 5 more complicated emotional forces that tend to pull us toward the world exploding in our own lives. A divorce when it didn't need to be, or a non-amicable divorce when it could have been a much friendlier. A country that we're seeing in a lot of troubles right now. So my purpose today is to share with you these 5 lures, what they are, and to some small degree to offer to you some insights on how you might deal with them. But my real purpose today is to offer you language. You're going to know each of these concepts already, but as you are doing your real work in the field of dispute resolution, my hope is that you might incorporate some of the language, some of these, the actual words of these lures, so that you can more specifically, you can hone in on the dynamics that are at play. You might even teach some of these ideas to those with whom you are working so that you can talk about that, which is so often abstract, intangible, hard to talk about. Vertigo, taboos, repetition compulsion, assault on the sacred, and identity politics. So as I walk through each of these, let me first say, what's the utility of these lures? Sort of said it already, but 1, their language to help you discuss hidden emotional dynamics. 2, they're a lens to help you understand what is going on in this conflict. Why are they not acting rational, these disputants, or you or me? And third, each of these lures offers some sort of prescriptive direction on how you can move the emotional energy toward that nice island and not toward the waterfall. So last thing before we go into them, the process for today, I ask you right now to call to mind a strained relationship in your own life. It can be professional, it can be personal, but it's one that you really care about. And as I walk through each of these 5 lures, these 5 emotional dynamics, I ask you to think through, how could this lure be relevant or applicable to me in my own life? Is my spouse and I engaged in this particular lure right now? Oh, I've gotten into that with my kid, with my mother-in-law, whatever it is. How do you see this applicable to you? And throughout our session, if you have an example that you think, so, this is a good example of that concept, feel free to raise your hand because I'd love to have some space to hear how you connect with these concepts as well. Are we okay so far? Great, okay, good. So let's start with the first of these 5 lures. So the first of the 5 is what I call vertigo. Where did this concept come from? Well, many years ago, this is now many years ago, I was a first-year college student, and I was taking a course in European history. It was taught by these 2 wonderful professors. One was a rabbi, the other was an English scholar, and they'd sit in the front of the room and constantly disagree with one another, and we students were enraptured by it. The English scholar was quite an eccentric professor, and it was a Monday class, and he comes in one day and starts talking about everything but European history, and we're leaning in. He says, this weekend, I was in the mall with my wife, and we were shopping for a bedspread. And he says, we got into the most terrible conflict we've ever gotten into. And of course, we students were interested in European history, but this was much more interesting, you know. So he says, we were there, and he says, my wife, she thought we needed this $500 bedspread. And I think this is the most terrible financial decision we ever can make. And he says, we are there in the mall, and we get into a little tiff at first. And then we start with the voices being raised. And then he says, we are yelling at one another, yelling over whether to purchase this bedspread or not, and on and on. And he says, all of a sudden, for just a moment, my eyes averted those of my wife. He said, I saw there was a circle of onlookers watching us. You know, he said, I had not noticed this. And then he said, I looked down at my watch, and 20 minutes had passed. I thought it was 5. We were now late to meet our friends in the mall. This is vertigo. Vertigo is when we get so consumed in a conflict situation that we can think about nothing else other than the perpetrator of that grievance upon us and everything they did to make us feel unhappy, awful, uncomfortable. You might have some sort of anger, threat, sense. You might fall into vertigo at work with a colleague, and then you walk out of your office room, and as much as you want to be there with your family, your mind is still there in vertigo. And I think vertigo is not just an affliction at the interpersonal level. I think at the national levels, we can get into vertigo too. All of a sudden, everybody is so consumed in the situation that we can no longer really think beyond what is right in front of us. And Harvey, did you have a thought or comment? Your hand went up, then it went down. I'd love to hear your voice.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was a full-time caregiver for my wife with dementia. And during this terrible time of the COVID, one of my main things to do was to protect my wife and myself from COVID. If I got it, I would not be functional to take care of her. If she got it, she could die. And I was part of a group of people here, resident council, and we were all dealing with this very amicably. And this particular morning, I went in, and one of the women was not wearing her mask. And I said very nicely, please put your mask on. And she ignored me. And the next thing that happened was, and I don't know where it came from, but I was screaming at her.
Mm-hmm.
Put your mask on.
Mm-hmm.
We have not had a good relationship since.
Yeah.
Even I came back later and apologized to her because I knew how much I was out of whack, and it didn't help.
No, I mean, and this I think speaks to what I'd imagine is the role of identity in conflict. What's more sacred, more valuable to us than our family? And the moment you feel a threat to family, boom, I'm in vertigo. Don't you threaten my family's survival right now. You know, as important as you are to my world, helping out, don't threaten my family. And vertigo appears so very quickly. The question is then, So one big point for everybody in the field of mediation or negotiation, dispute resolution, I found that labeling that experience can be really helpful. And truly, my biggest lab is always with my family. So if my wife and I get into a conflict, in my head now, I really do say, wait, Dan, you're moving toward vertigo right now. Is that where you want to go? And Harvey, sort of to your point, I remember it was a number of years back now, probably 3 or so, I was working with a group of Israeli and Palestinian diplomats. We talked about vertigo. It was about a week after our workshop, I got an email from one of the participants. She says, I was in a meeting just the other day, and with the other side, I won't say which side this person was on. I was in a meeting with the other side, and we had a very, very amicable conversation, a lot of good collaboration going on. And then she says we got to some of the more controversial issues. And she wrote in that email, all of a sudden I saw that little tornado of vertigo coming right toward me. And then she asked herself what I think is a beautiful question. She asked herself, do I really want to go there? And she said, in the email she wrote, no, not right now. And she was able to have more of a quote unquote rational or purpose-driven conversation. But what allowed her to do that was the language, in a way, the ability to label that emotional experience so she had choice where before she simply reacted. And so when I think of this notion of vertigo, it's a choice. At certain points in time, it may be that you want vertigo to overtake you. If you are protesting something that you passionately believe in, I am going to dedicate my full soul, my full spirit through vertigo in the moment right now. You may want it. But if my wife and I are in the midst of a very difficult argument, I don't want to say something I'm later going to regret. I want to be aware and make a conscious choice. One other point on vertigo, and I get so worried that people are going to get bored on Zoom. So if you get really bored, just raise your hand and let me know, and I'll move forward. We'll have a very transparent conversation today. How do you deal with vertigo? Another tool that I found useful is a jolt. Yeah. Think back to the time when you were 4 years old or 3 years old, and you discovered that putting a metal knife into an electrical socket in your house is not a good idea. It completely changes your state of being the moment you get an electrical jolt. I was watching a little sitcom a number of years back called Dharma and Greg. Anybody ever hear of that show? Hey, more of you than I thought. Cool. There was this, Dharma was this, sort of stereotypic hippie from a hippie family, and Greg was from a very conservative family, and he went to Harvard Law School, and you get the idea. They're about to get married. The whole family's in the midst of vertigo in a way. And finally, everybody calms down. Dharma and Greg go to the roof of their building, of their apartment complex. And at first, like, oh my gosh, so happy we could figure that thing out with our families. And then Greg says, yeah, I don't know what your mom was thinking there. And she says, excuse me? How about, and they get back into vertigo. And then all of a sudden, Dharma makes this wonderful move. She turns to Greg and she says, okay, I'm done. Meaning I'm done fighting. And he goes, well, what do you mean you're done? She said, no, I'm done fighting. He says, no, but nobody's won yet. Nobody's won. And she goes, fine, you win. No, but that's not the way it goes. She says, I am not going to abide by your script of vertigo. And within a minute in this little clip, they're hugging. It's not always that easy. And I recognize that in society, but the ability to, again, label vertigo, to diagnose why it might be happening, and to decide, do you want to go there, I find very useful. Oh, yes, and Janice, please. Oh, Janice?
I'm sorry. I was just agreeing with something. I didn't have a question.
Oh, you didn't? Okay, great. So in just a moment, we're going to move into a different realm now, okay? So we are going to, in a moment, to be going into breakout rooms. And I ask you with all sincerity right now, please don't abandon this entire workshop. Give us another 10 minutes at least. So in the breakout room, you are going to be paired with somebody you don't know who was a part of this group today. And you're going to be sharing 4 things with that person in confidence between the two of you. Are you ready? Yes? Drawer was like, sort of ready. Okay, so no, there we go. Now you're totally right. So here's the thing. Thing number 1 that you're going to be sharing is your political affiliation. So if you are a citizen of the United States, who did you vote for in the most recent election? Trump, Biden, Sanders, somebody else? What's your political affiliation? That's piece number 1 you're going to be sharing. Number 2, salary. What's your salary? And if you feel uncomfortable sharing this particular question, I get it. Feel free to share your family's net worth. So either way, salary or family's net worth, that's up to you. Question number 3, attractiveness. So as you are in the room with this other person, how attractive do you find that other person? On a scale of 1 to 10, we will assume that a 1 is not, ugh. A 1 is still, you are attractive, but modestly, and a 10 is, wow, you are unbelievable. And some of you might go, boy, this sounds awful, but social science says you're wrong, that we all make these judgments quite immediately in real life. I'm just asking you to make them explicit in order to build affiliation, connection. And the 4th of these is age. So what I ask you to do, don't share your own age. How old do you think the person is in the room with you? And the good news about this question is, after you share your guess, you can find out if the other wants to share how old they actually are. And by the way, we are not going to do this exercise, okay? We are not going to do this exercise. I normally would allow this to be a cliffhanger for the next 10 minutes, but I did this exercise recently, and about half the people on the phone call got off before we could debrief it, you know? So let me ask you right now, when you heard these 4 questions, what were you feeling? And I'd love to hear, what were you feeling toward me? What were you feeling about the exercise? Excited, terrified? Can I go Melissa Siegel? You say terrified. I'd love to hear what you were thinking there. Where are you, Melissa?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I would just never ask anyone those questions, and I would never share that information. So yeah. Just,
why?
So it's personal. I think that's, I mean, like salary, for example, is a personal thing. Political affiliation, I didn't really care about because I think anyone who knows me knows my political affiliation. I would never share what I thought of somebody about their attractiveness or what I thought of their age. I just think it's really judgy and feels terrible for me to do that to somebody.
And I'd like to go deeper, and let's get some other voices into why these questions are so startling, so terrifying, to use your thinking, or to use your words. Mars, what was your experience when you heard these 4 questions? And there was a moment at which you weren't quite sure if you were going into a room or not to share them with somebody else.
Hi, so when I saw these questions, I thought in particular the 3rd one was pretty awkward. But I think also that has to do with my own identity as a woman, to tell like a random person how attractive they are. I wouldn't want that done to me. So I think that made it extra awkward for me. Yes. But then also, I also realized that a lot of people left, and I was kind of contemplating, should I leave? But I thought, you know, let me stick it out. Let me see if it's actually not that bad. Let me see if I could, like, I guess, add some humor so it's not as awkward. And I am a student, so for me, salary, that wouldn't have really been the most awkward question for me. I think definitely the attractiveness one would have been the awkward one.
No, absolutely. And I must say, it's hard for me to even ask all of you to do this exercise due to the awkwardness of it. Carol, you're the next hand I see up right now. And your microphone is not on yet. Yeah.
I felt amused and lighthearted because I've never done something like that before and I'm elderly. But the attractiveness one, I started to fix my hair.
Oh.
So
So you,
I thought it would be wonderful as far as breaking out of this dispute resolution topic and just have some frivolous experience.
so I hear you saying it's amusing, it's frivolous. I hear others saying this sounds terrifying. Bob, what's your experience? You're next on my screen.
Well, I'm sort of like Carol. I'm on my 88th revolution around the sun, and I don't have a problem telling you that. As far as the attractiveness, oh, I'm well beyond that. And salary, well, you know, when you're on a fixed income. But the biggest problem I have then is the political affiliation. I, at one time, would be proud to say I'm a Democrat. Today, I'm not really sure about that. I'm not sure I want to be politically affiliated with any particular party in this country. I'm so conflicted about that I really don't know what more to say except
So so from hearing you, there's a risk in even verbalizing one's political affiliation. It puts you in a category, perhaps in your own head and possibly in the head of other people as well. Let's go to Tanya. Tanya, what were you feeling when you heard these 4 questions? Yeah. Up in your microphone, please. And Tanya, we might come back to you. Andrea, just because of the microphone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, like I was like, well, I did the same thing that I forgot the woman's name who said, you know, I said, oh my God, how's my hair look, you know, or whatever. But the whole thing is I was very anxious, as everybody wrote. And the underlying reason for that anxiety is, you know, fear that, oh my God, you know, my standing in the community, you know, like people, you know, what are people going to think of me? You know, like, am I making enough money? Am I worth enough? You know, are things going to be said about me? Am I going to be ostracized? Am I going to be thrown out? Like, fear of judgment is the main thing.
Yes. So there are huge consequences that we might experience by sharing our answers to each of these questions. And I see a lot of other hands, but I do want to get us to the big point here, why did I do this? And one of you, I love the point, is like, it seems like he didn't know what to do with his time, and so he wanted a filler. That was not the purpose here. The purpose was each of these questions deals with what? Somebody put it in the chat room right now. What do these questions all deal with? What's the theme behind all of them?
Identity.
It is identity, but it's a specific element of identity. And oh, I'm not quite there yet. It is, well, in my opinion, it's taboos. Each of these questions is a taboo. It is a social prohibition in many cultures, not all, in many minds, but as we saw, not all minds. A social prohibition, a taboo is an action, a thought, a feeling that some community deems unacceptable. You can't talk about that. Oh, race? No, we can't talk about that. Well, we can, but we really can't. Or gender, or political affiliation, or attractiveness. And I'm not saying we should be talking about every issue, but I am saying that taboos can be a big impediment to a good two-way dialogue. In my own work with Israelis and Palestinians, I found it really difficult to have them talk about some of the essential issues because those issues are taboo to talk about. How can I ever try to resolve a conflict with the other side when I'm afraid, or not afraid, but resistant, I should say, to calling them by the name that they want to be called? And I'm not judging whether that makes sense or not. I'm saying really practically, how do we resolve the conflicts in front of us if we're scared to death to talk about those taboos, those taboo issues? This is a real issue in our society, I think. Cancel culture, for example, makes so many people scared to death to talk about issues that may need to be talked about. Perhaps there are different kinds of venues we can create to allow the kind of safety for those issues to be talked about. Think about what you felt the moment I said you are going to be sharing these 4 things in a room. And now think what it's like for those who are really, really struggling in situations of power asymmetry and so on. And I cannot get my voice out there. I am scared to death. If I do open up this issue, the consequences on me could be grave, on my family could be grave, on my society could be grave. Taboos are a big issue. And I still see a number of hands up, and I'm not sure if you have things that you'd like to contribute. Who was next?
Me, Tanya.
Tanya, yes, Tanya. Where are you at right now?
I'm in New York City.
Oh, and I meant mentally, but physically, that's good. Okay.
Oh,
yes.
So mentally, I was actually looking forward to it because I wanted to challenge myself. One, to challenge myself and to see how I would feel. And two, to sort of, be forced into this position where it's to me, I looked at it as a learning opportunity. How would I, what can I learn from this? How can I, just to almost like looking at myself to see how would I react? And what are my opportunities to learn so that the next time I am in this position, right? This is almost like a dry run for the next time. If I really am in this position, I will already have practiced.
So this is a space to practice and to build a certain muscle, certain kind of muscle, emotional muscle in a way. Yes. I will tell you, Tanya, anything that I'm asking of our full group today, I've actually done. And I did this exercise. It was a few years ago. I was working with a leadership group, and we were talking about taboos. That evening, a whole group of the participants were by a fire pit, and they were drinking much too much. And I'm innocently walking by. I barely drink at all. And one of them says to me, "Shapiro, come here. We're doing it." Meaning we're going to go through your 4 questions. and I'm okay, fine. And I did this with this particular individual. I walked through, I shared, I listened to his own answers to the 4 questions. It was really, really scary and anxiety provoking. At the same time, after we did it, I felt somehow liberated. Like, oh, I don't need to be weighed down by this, as frightened as I was about these kinds of things. So it was this odd juxtaposition of experiences. Sabiha, your hand's been up for a while.
Yes, I at first was a bit taken aback by the attractiveness, not as to how I would be perceived, but how I would relate to the other person in the room about how attractive I found him or her, particularly if it was a him.
Yes.
But a few minutes later, I realized I am over 70. It doesn't matter to me how attractive I may be or whether I find another person attractive. I'm at a phase in my life where I can say what I think without fear of consequences. And so for me, I would have looked forward to this as an adventure.
As an adventure. Amazing. Yes. And with that, Matt, let's hear your thoughts too.
Hi. I really resented the questions and I really didn't want to do it, but I was prepared to do it. And I was upset that I was prepared to do it. And it kind of reminded me of those Stanley Milgram experiments of years ago, where you sort of give in to the authority of the expert, and you are sort of convinced to do something, even though you're very uncomfortable with it. And so that's what struck me. I was very relieved when you said we weren't going to do it, but I was upset with myself for the fact that I was prepared to do it.
And when you say you were prepared to do it, what does that mean? It sounds like there was an emotional working that happened within you.
Well, if we had gone through, I was thinking, gee, with the attractiveness, who's actually going to be honest about that? Everyone's going to go higher than you probably really believe. But I wasn't, I wasn't comfortable doing that. I wasn't comfortable talking about my salary or my former salary, and I would have preferred not to do it. But in the spirit of going along with the program, and also because I've been very impressed with you and your expertise, I didn't want to be the person who refused to do it. And yet there was part of me that really felt, put upon or disappointed that I was just going to follow through, even though I really found it objectionable.
the authority tells me to do something I know I should not do or feels uncomfortable to do, oh, I'll do it because they told me to.
Yeah.
Yes, got it. And I had like two thoughts, but I was multitasking, trying to read the chat room at the same time. Let's go one last voice right now, just for sake of time. Anastasia, you're next on my screen right now.
Hi, I'm enjoying this presentation so much.
I think you're the only, sorry to interrupt you, you're the only one enjoying it. Everybody else has been traumatized.
Oh.
Well, a few of you were amused and so on. Yeah.
Well, it's just that we in life have been frequently thrown into the pool with, and you can either be thrown into a pool alone or you can be thrown in with other people. And I really like it when I'm thrown in with other people. Having said that, I knew that I wasn't going to go through this alone. There was going to be someone else in the room with me. We were going to work it out as best we could to provide the, it's not a test, right? And that's in the sense, we could have made the rules whatever we wanted them to be, and the process, and communicate, and give all the disclaimers that we wanted. You didn't limit us. You didn't say, and it has to be the truth. You never said that. So I don't think you did. And not that we wouldn't give each other the truth, but we might say to one another, would it be okay if, with regard to salary, would it be okay if I gave like over this and under that, or something to that effect? But I wasn't going to go through it alone. That was number one. So I was thrilled. Number two, I was really anxious to get to the after party here, because not every, so many mediations are, the participants have this inside of them. And I don't care how great we are and how much and those of us who, we go through processes, we're still talking to human beings. Forget the processes, right? It's just like if you practice law, you can talk on till you're blue in the face. You can't forget these folks have emotions and all of the issues that you talked about. And so it's this conversation that I was really anxious to get to. I said, if I hang up now, I'm never going to know how to address, how I can better address and help the parties in a conflict. So this is great fun. So next time around, maybe we could do it.
Well, and I invite all of you afterward to find somebody else here and to do the exercise if you would like, but full autonomy in your court. But no, to your point as well, my hope is that this concept of taboos now might more consciously enter each of your minds as senior dispute resolution leaders, mediators. Think about all the ways that your clients, the disputants, are grappling with taboos. You get a family together and you have the sibling rivalries that nobody wants to talk about. It's taboo. You have the money issues. Oh, can't talk about that, not with mom here or dad here. You get the couple in the room and they're the sex issues. Can't talk about that, but that's the heart of the issue. Or race or gender or some of these other social, political issues. What is taboo that's sitting right at the center of your conflict? And everybody's talking about it. Or sorry, nobody's talking about it. And should you approach it? Should you not? Is it too hot right now? Too dangerous? Are there ways that you can slowly chisel away at that taboo issue? Gently talking about it with one of the parties in a breakout room of some kind. My big point again, just bring that concept of taboos into your thinking as you're in the midst of these conflict resolution situations. Yes, and Chuck says to me, Dan, it's 9:25 and you're on lore 2. Good point. Let's keep going. You've gotten me into a vertigo of curiosity about your perspectives. Let's move to the third of these lores. And I'll go through the last ones rather rapidly, just so we can have time for more open conversation as well. How many of you like Charlie Chaplin, the comedian? Some of you, okay. How many of you have ever seen the movie Modern Times? A few of you. Well, there's this wonderful scene in Modern Times where Chaplin and his partner buy this old shanty that you can see right in front of you on the screen right there. And they're giddy with excitement about this new home of theirs, but there's a little problem with it. Every time that Charlie Chaplin walks in through the front door, closes the door behind him, this plank falls down and bangs him on the head. And this happens day after day. Chaplin walks into the home, bangs the door, boom, the thing knocks him on the head, and then he lives life as he normally does. However, on one particular day, he walks into this home of his, and as he walks in, the plank does not fall. What do you think he does? He walks right back outside, walks back in, bangs the door as hard as he can, and finally, this plank hits him on the head as hard as it always had before. How many of you in your own life find yourself in a relationship where you repeat the same dysfunctional pattern of behavior again and again? You're banging yourself on the head, and you try to stop that form of behavior, but it feels much more comfortable this way. And we keep repeating that which we know we should not repeat. We psychologists, originated by Freud, call this the repetition compulsion. And it's as its name implies or suggests, it's the repetition, it's the repeating, the reenacting of some dysfunctional pattern of behavior, and we all do it. And it's complex. I won't go into the psychological complexities of why we call it a compulsion and not just a habit, but it's a deep thing. It is embedded into our psyche. And it's a little problematic because we have our repetition compulsion and the other side has their repetition compulsion. Let me give you an example from my own life. So when my wife and I deal with conflicts in slightly different ways. After we get into some sort of argument, my internal inclination is just to let's hug, let's make up. It's to reconcile the situation as quickly as we possibly can and to let it go. My wife, I found, tends to need some time. You know, give me some space. But you see the problem of these two dynamics at the same time. Hey, honey, let's make up. Ah, get away from me. Hey, honey, let's. And this is a problematic set of repetition compulsions. I was working on a book dealing with these concepts of repetition compulsion. And I suddenly said, well, Dan, what are your repetition compulsions? This one came to mind. And I said, well, what can I do about it? The next time my wife, Mia, and I got into an argument, I tried something a little bit different. After we got into the argument, I said, you know what? Why don't we take 15 minutes just to sort of chill out? Then let's come back and see if we can work on this thing a little better. I walk into my office. She goes in her own direction. And for 15 minutes, I can promise you, my heart is racing. My face is red. Every bone in my body wants to go and heal this thing immediately. That's the compulsion. But my mind is saying, no, just give some space, give her some space, give some time. 15 minutes later, I walk out and we have a wonderfully easy conversation. Repetition compulsion. I ask each of you to think through in your own life, who's somebody who you are in a strained relationship with. You could probably right now plot out everything you say and feel and everything they say, and you're going to know your cycle of discord. Once you know it, again, you have power over it. And in the relationship with Mia, we now can literally say to one another, wait a minute, we are moving back into that old repetition compulsion, that old pattern. Do we want to go there? Again, I give it a name, we give it a name. Now we can deal with it in a different way. You can imagine the same thing being useful as you're working with as a mediator with your clients, with the disputants. You catch them in a conflict dynamic, label it. And you can you can inquire it later on. Do you know, I see you're going back into that old, you know, I can't think of a good name right now, but that old pattern. Do you really want to go there? Repetition compulsion. Let me go to the fourth of these 5 lures, and I'll take another probably like 5 or 10 minutes. Assault on the sacred. So again, these lures are things that move us toward that waterfall, especially when our identity feels threatened or attacked. An assault on the sacred is an attack to the most meaningful elements of your own identity. The moment I criticize some characteristic of your identity that you hold as deeply part of who you are, boom, we are back in that divisive mentality, you and me. And it doesn't only have to be around religion. With the word sacred, some assume is around religion. It could be anything that you hold as deeply meaningful. If I attack that, we're back in that divisive mindset. The fifth of these things that I'm calling lures, they lure us toward the divisive mindset, is identity politics. There's the popular usage of this concept. I'm defining it slightly differently. To me, identity politics is the process of allying with a person or a group to advance a political objective. We Americans must do this. Who's the we? And who's the implicit they? I was reading a book on leadership last night, and let me show you what I was reading just last night, because it struck me as an example of identity politics. The book was talking about, it said in the 1930s, there was this booklet written by Goebbels, a guide for Nazi speakers in the early 1930s. So this book initially in Germany got very little traction when it was first written, and then it became one of the ultimate books that people went to support the Nazi ideology of extremism. It stressed solidarity with fellow Germans. And there was a quote that was taken from the book. It was in this book I was reading as well. The quote, you can see it on your screen there, is, "What is the first commandment of every National Socialist? Love Germany above all else and your ethnic comrades." The point the book was making, and I'd like to make here, is ethnic comrades. Who exactly is that? And this book had defined the boundary of nationhood in racialized terms that excluded Jewish people and others from the national embrace. And according to this book's authors, say this was the starting point of socio-political processes leading to extermination. Who's the we? Who's the implicit they? There's the danger that identity politics can be used to divide. We use language, we use politics to separate us from them, but there's also the opportunity. And my hero in life is this gentleman, Nelson Mandela. He saw identity politics in a very different light. After 27 years, as you know, in prisons, he comes out and he doesn't say it's me versus you. He subscribes to that beautiful African philosophy of Ubuntu. It's not me versus you, and it's you and I and we and us and all of us interconnected together in a singular fabric. What's one of the first things that Mandela does after he gets out of prison, 27 years there, he invites for lunch the widow of the president who had imprisoned him. That is a we mentality. That is a wholly different way of thinking about identity politics. And I call that the relentless we. Back to the tribes exercise where the world tends to explode. When the world has been most close to being saved, it's always because there's at least one, and often only one, leader within that group who says it's not about you or me. It is about us. It is about us. It is about us. It is a relentless we. It is an energy of the we, of all of us affiliated together, that at least is as strong as the energy of divisiveness. You put all this together, and this is the basic model. We want to get to that cooperative mindset. We need to use our rational tools of getting to yes and so on, but there are these undercurrents that are there. They're not a quick fix. It takes work to deal with these things, but we can. And these 5 lures that I found particularly powerful in situations of emotionally charged conflict. 1, stop vertigo before it stops you. 2, navigate taboos with care. 3, resist that pull to repeat that which you know will be dysfunctional. That takes work. 4, respect the sacred to the extent you possibly can. And 5, use identity politics to unify, not to divide. So with that, let me close up the formal talk right now, say a huge thank you to all of you and a slight apology to all of you for traumatizing you earlier. But by the way, my purpose for that piece though, really was so you could feel what it's like to be in the realm of a threatened taboo. So that the next time that you are mediating with people who are grappling or may grapple with a taboo issue, you're going to empathize with them in a different way. That's my hope. Anyway, thank you so much. I open it now to dialogue, criticism, questions, thoughts. It really is an honor to be with you. And my goal is to learn as much from you as I possibly can. So I'm going to stop talking. Yeah. Oh, and what do we do now? Sorry, I don't know how we facilitate the next part, Julie.
Dan,
Yeah,
would you like to
I
call on people with their hands up, or?
Sure, that's great. Okay, yeah, sorry, I spaced because I wasn't sure of the process. Mark, your hand is up right now.
Just a minute, Dan, do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can
Yeah, I was
see
just trying to figure out
the-
how to do that.
Give people a minute to write down his email address.
Okay. And we can share that, I suppose, in the chat room too.
Yeah.
And we will be circulating a resource, not the exact slides, but a resource and a follow-up email as well. So you will have all this information.
Hi. One of the things that I realized regarding that exercise that didn't happen is that you really touched on primary things that we are evaluated by in this culture, and that make us feel so vulnerable. And I think that's not only acknowledging that, but really looking at what the issue is and seeing to what extent you feel vulnerable is important to recognize the importance of that issue to the other person, whether it's to you or not. You know, things like security, things like having enough income to support your family, things like that, and which goes with money and safety. So this was a wonderful piece of work. I look forward to. I guess it's all in your book.
Yeah, so these ideas are written up in Negotiating the Non-Negotiable, along
Okay.
with much more prescriptive advice as well. But I think you're right. I mean, to your point, it is about vulnerability. And with vulnerability comes risk. And I think the problem with taboos is that
Sure.
if you break a taboo, there's a risk of punishment of some kind, physical, social, alienation, and so on. Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy, you're the next hand I see. I'm just going to go in the order I see everybody's hands raised on the screen.
I'm fascinated with the repetition compulsion. I know we can't have a lecture on it now, but the fact is it's fascinating that we keep repeating these behaviors and over again keep experiencing the same outcomes from them. And what is it? Is it just that doing the same thing is comforting versus doing something different? I mean, what drives that?
It's a great question. The concept originated with Sigmund Freud.
Yes,
He had this, and he had this basic. My gosh, I see it. My brain is not working in mornings. I'm not a morning person. My wife is totally a morning person. So if you see me struggling with words, it would not happen at midnight. So next time, let's have this talk at midnight. Sorry, totally tangent there. But that concept originated with Freud. He had this basic principle. He called it the pleasure principle. And the notion was we are driven toward pleasure. We are driven away from pain. And then he started doing psychoanalysis with people in very dysfunctional relationships, including domestic abuse situations. And he noticed that these primarily women moved from one abusive relationship to another, and he said, wait a minute, this is certainly not pleasure. What's happening? That's when he coined this notion of the pleasure, of the repetition compulsion. And he and many will link it to issues of trauma or unmet needs from our childhood. So if one was abandoned in childhood, My every conflict is going to be a way to try to rectify that feeling of abandonment. And yet the problem of the repetition compulsion is that I'm also afraid of being abandoned. So I will distance myself in a relationship and repeat the same dysfunctional trauma that I experienced from years earlier. So it's this very complex dynamic at core. When I'm working with students, I simplify it, so we don't really go into the place of trauma per se. And it's much more just, what's the cycle of discord that you find yourself in? And I literally have the students plotted out into a little, almost a circle with nodes. And then I say to them, look at each of those nodes. You say this, they do that. You feel this, they do that. Choose one of those nodes. Work to change that one node. Because if you change one node, you change the system. And that was me and Mia in that example. Yeah. So I think, just to answer your question more specifically, in the book, I talk about what I call the lore of the compulsion. What at a deeper emotional level is luring us functionally to repeat that behavior that rationally we know is ridiculous to repeat. And I suspect that countries have repetition compulsions as much as individuals. We, a country, continue to repeat the same dysfunctional patterns, structural and so on. And awareness of those patterns, again, brings us power. Thank you. And who's that? Mark? And I'm confused if we've heard anybody's voice before. If we've heard your voice before, maybe we'll pass on to Mike. Have we heard your voice before? We did, I think. So let's go. Who else? Eric, please. Eric Jensen.
While Eric unmutes, if you've spoken, would you lower your hand, please? Thanks.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
There we go. Great.
Yes, fascinating presentation. Thanks so much. Two things I just wanted to sort of a couple of questions and comments to raise, and then I'll just sort of step back and if you would react to them. So in regard to the taboos, I guess what came to mind initially as you sort of raised those is from a cultural perspective, what is the actual function of taboos? It almost seems like those are issues that within it, like if you look at our culture from a power perspective, those are things that the powerful oftentimes are uncomfortable speaking of, depending on their position or not. So are these taboos sort of a function of the power dynamics within our culture? And to me, the question is, maybe that's a pretty interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
The second thing I would point out is in regard to your last comment to say utilize identity politics to unify. And it seems like that's somewhat internally contradictory. I guess as a white male, middle-aged man, it's easy for me to say, oh, your identity politics are all getting in the way of everything. We all need to sort of come together and use our shared humanity and identity to overcome these things. But yeah, I'm the one that's not sort of dealing with the traumas that sort of are implicit in what these identity positions are. So it's really easy for me to sit back and say that. But getting back to the notion of being with people, those are the things I feel like I need to really test myself about and sort of address for myself to be able to move forward with people who are experiencing these things, and for the first time feel a voice in regard to sort of naming them and talk about them and actually feel like, wow, I am something. I'm human. I'm part of this.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's it. Thank you so much for your presentation.
No, amazing points, amazing questions. To me, I hear the concept of power behind both of your questions. So I agree with you completely that taboos often can be a way for the powerful to hold on to power. It's taboo to talk about issues of race in our society. Don't do it. Or we can get locked by certain powers. And that's why I think on the issue of taboos, it is important to recognize that those taboos are there and to build some sort of strategic plan to, dismantle taboos that are moving forward unfair norms or dynamics or laws. So absolutely, to the first point, I think power is at the essence of taboos. And that's what makes it so scary as well. You know, to break taboos is because you are testing the waters, you're moving into the waters of the powerful. I remember being in one of the, I should keep this fairly anonymous, but in a more of a dictatorial country a number of years back and working there. And one evening, one of my friends hosted a party, and it was an innocent enough party, but at one point someone was outside and they started criticizing the government. That person was hushed up so quickly. It was taboo and illegal as well to do so, but they were certainly threatening the power dynamic in that country. And I think the linkage between power and taboos is important. When I talk about utilizing identity politics to unify, my goal is not to reduce the level of voice of any particular group, but to actually increase the voice for everybody, to create more space for everybody. It's the idea of saying, yes, there are differences that are here and problematic differences. Some groups have much less power than others. How do we all work together to the extent possible to help improve that situation? So we are aligning in a coalition against, you know, problematic issues of some kind. So that's my notion of identity politics. My notion of identity politics is not the common way of using the term, which is a minority group fighting for some sort of political, some sort of politics. That's not quite the way I'm using the terminology. It's more of a process of aligning with other people. It is us working together on an issue rather than us divided fighting over an issue.
Okay,
Thank you.
Robin, please, yes.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm thinking when you started this whole talk, you invited us to think about a personal issue and how we would apply it to all of these things. And the one that immediately came to mind is in my own family with a very close relative who has a personality disorder. And for all of my training as a mediator and specializing in family and it's hardest with our own people, those we're close to. And this group has experienced divisiveness on the question of mental illness and how to deal with that when it is the elephant in the room, in the mediation room is the taboo. And I found myself wondering when you were talking about taboos, okay, when everyone is at the table and this particular person is behaving in a certain way because it's because of their underlying condition. And I know we go to the behavior and not the label or the And it is what we were just talking about in terms of the power dynamic that the person who may have this condition or an individual can wield power in this way. And I don't know how to deal with it. So could you take out your magic wand, please?
Well, actually, I used to be a magician, but unfortunately not in the conflict resolution realm. When I was a kid, I was a magician, and I loved magic because it was, I still believe in it a little bit. But no, first, thank you for sharing your situation. It sounds really meaningful and it sounds complicated. So I dare not offer specific advice in your situation without knowing much more context. One thing that comes to mind is the book that Roger Fisher and I wrote way back in 2005. It's called Beyond Reason. In that book, we asked the question, as you are negotiating or mediating, how do you deal with emotions? How do you deal with your emotions? And how do you deal with the emotions of the other side? The problem we found was that this world of emotions is just so complicated, certainly in a family context, but not only. You have all these emotions, I have all these emotions, there are all these causes of these emotions, there are all these things we can do with these things called emotion. We got overwhelmed in trying to figure out what is some prescriptive advice that we can offer, simple advice. And we ultimately came to the conclusion, rather than advising people to deal with emotions directly, turn your attention one step back to a handful of things that we call core concerns. Matters that are important to all of us. And there are 5 of them that we found are particularly powerful in negotiation to help stimulate more helpful emotions. And I just wonder whether this framework might offer a little bit of help, you know, in the situation that you mentioned. Core concern number one, appreciation. Does each party feel heard and understood and valued, or misunderstood and devalued, unheard? Core concern number two, autonomy. Does that person sitting across from you at the dinner table feel like you are imposing on their autonomy? No, you can't do that, can't do this. No, you have to take your medications. Their autonomy feels imposed upon. I'm lesser of a human on some level the way I feel. You're doing it out of self-protection, but it has an impact on them. Or sorry, out of protection for them, but it has an impact on them. Autonomy. The third of these core concerns is affiliation. What's the emotional connection like between you and the other? Certainly, many mental illnesses complicate the task of building affiliation, but it still can happen. You know, I've worked many years ago in a psychiatric community with people suffering from schizophrenia, and even in the more extreme variations of that psychopathology, there are moments of connection, and it's beautiful, it's magical, it is magical. The fourth of these core concerns is status. Who's up? Who's down? And how complicated that becomes in any family. You know, why does everybody look at him or her first whenever a question's being asked about money? Or why do you think you know everything about my life? Yes, I'm suffering from clinical depression, but that doesn't mean that I am incompetent. And of course, these aren't the conversations that explicitly tend to happen, but they're implicitly there. They're affecting our every feeling and our every behavior. And the fifth of these core concerns is role. What role are you playing in the family dynamic? What role is everybody else playing? And are those roles the most useful roles they can be? Maybe you see yourself as the role of supporter or helper. Maybe that's not the most useful role for you. Maybe you should just, you know, be, I don't know, the big sister, the mother role, whatever it is, I don't know. But to give more thought to what roles we tend to play in our conflicts, in our human interactions, and then to make a conscious decision what temporary role may be most useful for me to play in that interaction. And I found these 5 core concerns to be incredibly useful when dealing with disputes of all kinds.
Yeah.
They're both diagnostic. They help us understand, why am I feeling so upset? Rather than figuring out which of 200 emotions I'm feeling, I can go, wait a minute, I don't feel appreciated right now. My autonomy doesn't feel respected, and so on.
Yeah.
And they're also prescriptive. Each one of those things, and thank you, Nikki, for putting them there. Each one of those in the chat, each one of those 5 core concerns is something you can do something about. How do I better appreciate that other family member and make sure I get the appreciation too? How do I better build affiliation with them and also, you know, respect their autonomy and so on? So anyway, that's a simple framework that may be helpful. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And
George.
who's next? I've lost it. Yeah.
George.
George, please.
Oh, okay. So thank you so much for this presentation. I've often wondered, you know, because coming from Africa, politics as done in this in the United States is something that we admire and look up to. But I've also, on the same, on another level, wondered why there's so much acrimony, for instance, in Congress, when they're discussing particular bill or issues. So I wanted you to comment on identity politics, why vis-a-vis the impediment, obstruction to them collaborating or working together to solve the problem for constituencies.
When I was developing these concepts of, when I was developing the tribes exercise, that exercise, which I now call the nation building exercise, but then the tribes exercise, there were a few things that were very striking. At Davos, when the world exploded, what were people arguing over? They were arguing over the most trivial things. One said, my tribe believes in compassion. And the other said, no, humanitarianism should be the dominant value system of our new world order. I have no idea what the real difference is between those two things when the world is on the line. Without exception, or I should say almost without exception, every time the world explodes, almost every time the world explodes, it is not due to differences over policy and politic per se. It's due to loyalty to one's own tribe, to one's own group. And I think the United States has fallen into that trap as well, you know, where there are threats to identity. People move back towards some group, some tribe, some political entity, and they align with its politics, no matter what those policies are. So it is negotiating much less on the merit, on principle, than it is on the principle of allegiance itself. And this is tricky, tricky business, because to me, the fundamental taboo of the tribe is betrayal. And we see that. You know, there are a few people even in today's newspaper who say, you know what, I am of this party, but I think what just happened was voice myself in the public record. And those people get ostracized and more threats to their life. So, I mean, so I think the challenge we have in front of us right now is to move from that divisive mindset to more of a communal mindset where we are all in this together. There are differences here, but there's a national fabric that we can draw upon, that leaders can embrace, that all of us can embrace. I think part of the problem as well is that we point the finger at leaders and say, you're bringing us down a rabbit hole, entering vertigo and worse. Maybe that's true, but we all have a part in this. You know, and the mere fact of 200 of us, 187 of us on this call right now, if each of us goes out to try to build a bridge, a political bridge with somebody else, trying to understand their perspective around an issue that we find reprehensible, but to listen to the extent that they ultimately feel appreciated and we understand them in a new way, there's a transformation that happens. The problem is it's incredibly hard to do. It's a very emotional process.
So we are just about at 10 o'clock. We will cease the recording at 10, and Dan has agreed to hang around for a short while. So Dan, you have been phenomenal this morning, and we can't thank you enough. And
Thank you.
You can see all of the applause on the screen. For those of you who need to leave, we are officially adjourned, and we will continue. So, Nikki, are you still on? Can you stop
Yes.
the recording?
The recording is being stopped right now, unless Dan, you have a final word.
I
You
just
want on
wanted
the record.
On the record, a huge thank you. And I could say that off the record as well. It's such an honor to be with all of you today. And I look forward to continued conversation to hear your thoughts on all of these questions. Good luck with it. Good luck with negotiating the non-negotiable.
Thank you so much. Okay, Nikki, you're gonna